My name is Johan Lehtinen, and I'm one of the guys behind the Vaadin thing. So probably the first question to ask is, how many of you know what is Vaadin? About 30% or 40% or so. So let's make it clear. It's a Finnish word that means female reindeer. And if you take a look at the logo, it kind of shows a reindeer in there somewhere. But the actual definition might be more like it's a framework for building desktop-like applications that run on web. And when I'm kind of saying that it's kind of yet another web framework, people start to scream immediately. So this is a bit different web framework. It doesn't have any of those things inside. So it's not about JavaScript, not about manipulating DOM, it's not about plugins. It's just Java, plain Java, and nothing more. So you can actually turn the logo a bit and kind of show what we mean with that. So it's Java in the front and hides the complexity of HTML behind it. A bit of a background. I started the project in 98 I was leading a team that created a healthcare portal, and we ended up having a lot of mess. We coded 100 to 200,000 lines of Perl code to create a portal, and we had to deal with a lot of web technologies and kind of incoherencies between the web browsers. And we started thinking that maybe we could use some of those object-oriented things that has been floating around on the desktop world, and decided to create something out of that. So in year 2000, we found a company to create this technology, released it in 2002 already, added Ajax in the mix, added Google Web Toolkit in the mix, and a bit more than a year ago we introduced Vaadin. So it's kind of continuation of that development that started 10 years ago. And actually it has been released stable, so you can run applications coded with Millstone in 2003 with today's Vaadin with minimal modifications. Okay, there is some guy preaching about some technology, and you should ask what's the hook, what that guy is trying to sell to you. And in this case, the license kind of guarantees that there is no hook. If you want to know who pays the bills and who pays the flights, you can kind of see the commercial offering in the brochure. But that's about it. So it's actually truly free to use in any kind of commercial applications. So today's presentation, first we are going to talk a bit about server-side RIA. What is it? Then see it in practice, coding live one small application, and then look at Vaadin a bit more carefully. And I hope you have a lot of questions in the end. So let's start with the server-side RIA. In RIA you have to always ask what the heck is RIA. So some kind of definition is in place. You have seen like tens of thousands of definitions. This is my favorite one. I fully believe that this is true if you kind of define it in this way. So if you are billing by hour, you are going to make a lot of hours. From an architectural point of view, everybody knows this. This is Web 1.0. You have web server, you have web page. In the web page, it can request more information from the server, all the MV symbology on the server side. Works fine for most applications, or at least for page-oriented applications. Then came along kind of client-side RIA. You could call it a fat client. So the basic idea is that you move the view and the controller to the server side, to the client side, and achieve a lot of more interactions within the web browser. So this is kind of great idea. You can get much faster responses out of the client by moving everything into the client. But unfortunately, it's not that easy. So if you have been trying to create a bit more complex application within the web browser, like let's say 10,000 lines of JavaScript code, it's kind of a bit hard. And there are 3 reasons for it. First, the browsers are a bit different. They have different features. They perform different. For example, IE6 is like 50 times slower than Chrome at the moment. And if you're trying to target both browsers at the same time with the same application, you have to make some compromises. Either use kind of only that's possible in IE6 or do a bit more complex program. Also, there are a lot of bugs, different bugs, and not only in IE, it's each of the browsers. Firefox, different versions, even recent versions have different really nasty bugs in them, and you have to kind of tackle them somehow. Then came along Google Web Toolkit. This is kind of really, really nice solution for the problem. So, how many of you have been using Google Web Toolkit, by the way? Quite a few. So, for the rest of you, kind of 1-minute course of Google Web Toolkit. It's a compiler. You put in your application in a Java language, some kind of widget set from Google or some other vendor that extends Google Web Toolkit, and then implementation of core Java classes. Compile them, and out comes different versions for different browsers. Actually, you can solve a lot of problems with that kind of approach. It's much, much simpler. You can use just Java, forget mostly about the web. It's much more cost-effective. You spend much less time debugging JavaScript. And you get a lot more extendable end result. And with that, I mean, when you're programming in Java, you have clear interfaces. You have Javadoc. You have object-oriented architecture, and it's mandated. You cannot kind of get away from that. But in JavaScript, it's kind of wild, wild west. You can do quite nice things also, but you can do something else. But you don't have to go fat or client-side to do rich applications. You can do quite well also on the server side. They are kind of thin client application. So in server-side RIA, it looks something like this. You keep the model view controller on the server side. You have some kind of thing that sits in between the client and the server side, and in the client you are still manipulating the DOM. A bit more complex, but much, much simpler at the same time. And it's much simpler because all the framework vendors, they kind of put a black box on top of the communication layer and on the client side. So if you want to, you can only view the server side. You can only work on the server side. Because you're on the server side, you can do things you have been used to in Java. So you get all the benefits of the Google Web Toolkit. Simpler, more cost-effective, more modular. But at the same time, it's even simpler. Because you are running it on the server side, you can forget about the client side fully. All the calls are synchronous. You don't have to deal with that Ajax thing anymore. You can just call the server resource and get the response. And first of all, you can call the server resources. You can go to the database layer. You can use the full Java stack. You can run actually even any kind of language that runs on top of JVM. You can use all the Spring libraries, whatever you are using, without any restrictions. And at the same time, it's quite a bit more secure. All the things stay in the server, so you're not sending your code to the client at all. You're opening much less web services to the web. But also there is some restrictions or things where client-side RIA is better. Server-side RIA clearly is not as scalable as client-side RIA. There are restrictions. You do more processing on the server side. Your applications eat server memory. I get always asked how scalable it is, and it's really hard to answer because it depends on your application. In one application we tested in a 16 gigabyte server, it's kind of ticket selling application. The memory gives you enough space to handle 50,000 concurrent users, but then the backend logic starts to limit it even further. You can safely run something like 10 to 20,000 concurrent users within one server. And of course, you can put multiple servers in the front. A kind of strict restriction is that you cannot go offline. With the HTML5 and client side, you can go offline kind of code the whole thing in HTML5 and store the data within the web browser. With server-side RIA, it's not possible. But in practice, the biggest advantage of server-side RIA is that it's much, much simpler, much, much faster to code than client-side RIA. And if I'm kind of trying to tell that to you, are you going to believe that? I think not. So we have to kind of try it out. What can we do in 15 minutes? Or it's 10 past 4 already, and I have, how much? 35 minutes left. So we can maybe use even a bit more than 15 minutes. Let's try to do application like this. So this is kind of small CMS in a box, or kind of document management application that shows you a bunch of Javadoc files. You can view them, and to make it a bit more challenging, you can also edit them, and you can edit them in VisiBook mode. And of course, save it back to the disk and so forth. So let's try to create that kind of application. And this time we are trying to do it kind of in a clean way. No tricks, no cut and pasting, no code generation, nothing like that. So slowly, piece by piece, line by line. So let's first create a new Vaadin project. It's just a standard Java web project. Let's call it, what would be appropriate? Magnolia Light. No, that's, okay, maybe we call that. Sorry. So we created the project, and basically what we get into the project, it's a standard Java web application layout. We have one web XML file, and in that file there is only one servlet here. So it comes with the Vaadin package. And for that servlet, we give one parameter, which application we are going to run. And then we are saying where we are deploying it. It's that simple. No changes there needed. And then we, of course, have Vaadin library. It's just one jar file you can drop into any Java project, no dependencies. And the application itself. And the application is quite simple. How many of you are familiar with Swing? Most. So it should be quite familiar to you. We create a new window. That's basically the web browser here. We add one label, hello world, and that's it. So when the user comes to the web page, application starts. All the application state is stored in the user HTTP session. Init is run, and then application is prepared, and kind of Vaadin takes over. So to run that application, it should show hello world. If we are lucky. Okay, so we got it running. So in our application, we had some kind of storage for the documents. Here we are going to use like most dummy one I can think of. So just one directory with set of files. Here are just plain HTML files. In a real world application, you would be using something else, of course. But in 15 minutes, it might be better to use just file system. So let's create some kind of data layer here. File system container docs. So I'm probably going to make a lot of mistakes. Please help me out. So I'm creating kind of data binding backend here and pointing that to the folder on my desktop. Yeah. So now I have a backend here. We need something to select the file. Let's use let's say, ComboBox, like the most simplest thing we could use. Let's go to Selector. And for the ComboBox, we could give some kind of caption for it, but we don't need it, and bind that to docs. So now our ComboBox shows the list of documents. And we need some kind of viewer here also. Label viewer. So it's just a simple label that shows the contents of the document. And actually we are rendering HTML, so let's put that in the HTML mode. Like this. So now we have two components and we just have to put them on the screen. And like this. Actually we could start to use real web browser for it. Okay, now there is kind of list of documents on the screen, keyboard navigation. We could use like autofilling and that kind of stuff directly, but it does nothing because we haven't asked it to do anything. So let's add a listener here. Selector. Every time you get kind of event, do something. New value change event. Oh, value change listener, sorry. And yeah. And in that listener we could just change the document on the screen. So let's say viewer, set data source, show the new document, and maybe we could use a helper called text file property that just reads the document from the file system. And we get the document from the selector, of course. Selector get value. And maybe we should cast that also like this. And maybe we should also advise our thin client to send all the events directly back to the server side. So we could say selector set immediate true. So now it should send the selection events back to the server side. How many of you are still following what we are doing? Everybody, so it's that simple. Great. One thing, it's a stateful application. It kind of remembers the state where we left, so we have to force it to reload just to clear the state. And now when we select a document, nothing happens. Oh, thanks. Has been a long day. I started from Turku 4 a.m. So, no need. Now it looks much better. So we can kind of create a quick and dirty viewer application like this. It doesn't look like the application we wanted to create, and one of the reasons was that we used split panel. So we could just use split panel here, like this. And we used table component. And one of the nice things in Vaadin is that it has quite compatible API between different components. I can just switch this component to table, like this. So now we have table on the screen. Table don't select by default, so we add the selecting here. So let's see. Please table be selectable. And the result looks something like this. So it's kind of with the broken layout, but it already works and all the navigation, that kind of stuff works. Actually, we get things like lazy loading by default, so we can scroll through the data and it loads more data from the server automatically. So we don't need any paging or that kind of stuff anymore. But to fix the layout, we could say for the table set size full, and it means please fill or use all the space you are given. So now we have like scalable layout and all the viewing part we needed. How much time left? We used 10 minutes. So let's add an editor here. And we need an edit button for that, and we could put the edit button here after the document. So what we do is that we wrap a layout here. We add kind of horizontal, vertical layout and add the viewer and the edit button to that layout. So vertical layout created here. And we add that to window, and to vertical layout we add our viewer. And then we could add one button also there. Let's see. Oops. New. What kind of libraries I have here? It's amazing. All the features in Spring. Edit button, and actually we could use the or add the listener directly here. New click listener. And fix the imports. Okay. And we want to edit our documents in new window, so let's create a window, or let's call it dialog. And with the caption editor, and add that window to our main window here. So now we should have one window on the screen. But for the editor component, let's create a new component, because in Vaadin, most things are not written like I have written here in kind of one function, non-modular way. It's much more common to kind of create new components, and the components are immediately reusable. So here we do kind of composite component or custom component in Vaadin language. Let's call it editor. And for the editor component, it created, sorry, now I lied. I said that no code generation, and now I had generated these two methods here, but you can see that they don't do much. Kind of stub for the editor, and for the show, let's try out the Widget editor. Actually, the screen is really, really small for this. We want to use rich text area. Put that on the screen. Actually, we could edit it a bit. Let's call it editor, and let it use all the space. And let's put that in the top corner, like this. So now we have our editor component that has nothing but the rich text area. The nice thing is that here is a full round trip. I can continue editing in the Java code and go back to the Widget editor and so forth. But we don't need much here, just what we are going to edit. So property is the document that we are going to edit, And we are going to give that to rich text editor component. Editor set property data source, the doc, or actually doc that we are going to edit. So now our editor component is ready. And 14 minutes. So we could add it here. New editor directly into the window. And we need some kind of file to edit, and the file is already shown in the viewer. So viewer get property data source. Oh. Thanks. Does it compile? Yes. What did I do? No, just rolling took some time. Okay, so select the document, click Edit button. We have kind of pop-up window. In the pop-up window, we have an editor where we can start to edit the thing. Let's add some notes. Actually, we could use some fonts. That's and then just save back to the file. And the nice thing is all automatically updated in the other component that use the same data source. So that kind of data bindings and listeners and notification mechanisms, they are totally automatic. So I think it's almost the application we wanted to do. I am sure that you believe that we can complete the application with some more minute details, but I think it might be interesting to see some demos instead. How many of you think that you can code that application after this lecture? So it was quick course in Vaadin. Okay, let's go back to the presentation. So, as a summary, Vaadin is server-side RIA, but at the same time it also includes the benefits of JWT. All the Vaadin client side is coded in JWT, so it can be extended in JWT. If you happen to be creating, let's say, a CMS system and you need a component that's not in the Vaadin, you can build that with JWT. Some demos. Let's start with the basic demo. This is the page you get when you download the Vaadin package. There is a kind of built-in small server that shows a bunch of demos. The screen resolution is here a bit limited, but let's try out the kind of main demo. This is kind of list of components included in Vaadin. For any component, you can take the component, try it out, see how it works, and see a source code example and see how it has been implemented. So you can go through the components and start learning how to use them. Also, as you note, here is full back button support and deep linking and that kind of stuff. It's not enabled by default, but you have to kind of enable it for your application. One of the interesting things is theming or kind of skinning support in Vaadin. So this is what we already saw, called Reindeer. It's the basics theme that comes with Vaadin. It's a bit business-like, bit boring, but I think because Vaadin is mostly used for boring business applications, it just suits it fine. But it's quite nice looking for being a boring business application theme. There is also a bit more fancy theme that comes with Vaadin called Runo, Poem in English. I hope that our development team stops that IKEA style of using Finnish words for our product names. But so you can do a more, I would say, Web 2.0 kind of things with Vaadin. This is clearly too small screen for it. Yeah, I can put it full screen, so we almost see the bookstore here. Okay, but this is kind of another kind of theme. There is also some other themes available. One of the nicest ones available from our component repository is called Chameleon. It's kind of theme and a theme editor at the same time, so you can quickly do themes that fit to your company colors and so forth. So we could, let's say, create our own new theme quickly. It's going to be beautiful. So theme for the Colorblind. Actually, there is some small button. It automatically packages as a Vaadin theme, and you can download it and drop into your application. What else? Maybe this one. It kind of shows quickly that you can embed other technologies within Vaadin. So, for example, here is Flex-based component in the bottom. It's wrapped as a Vaadin component, and all of your developers who don't know a line of Flex or ActionScript can use it on the server side from Java APIs. Still have some time for some other demos. Yeah, everybody of you got the Vaadin book, and there are a lot of examples in the book. The writer of the book, or author of the book, Margo Grönroos, he at the same time created a bit Spartan-looking demo called Book of Vaadin Examples. But the nice thing is that all the source code listings in the book are here in the demo, and you can write all of them out like this. And I think the main thing why he built this is that you can automatically convert the source code to docbook format, but that's a kind of minor thing here. But to learn about different things within the book, it might be helpful to open also this demo application and kind of try them out in live. That would be good. There are also a bunch of commercial components for Vaadin, for example, calendar components and so forth. I don't show them. It's not everything that I have shown is open source Apache license, totally free for commerce. Other than this component, this is costing like $100 or so. But I'm not going to show any other commercial stuff. So, what's the magic inside that makes it work? It's actually quite simple. All the components that we used in the demo were just Java classes like plain old Java objects on the server side with full Java APIs. There is for each of these a counterpart class called Widget on the client side, created in Google Web Toolkit. It kind of implements the rendering engine for the widget or for the UI component. So you can do all the coding on the server side with normal Java tooling, with normal Java JDK running normal Java virtual machine on the server side. And those widgets that come with the framework, they kind of do all the magic for you on the client side. So normally for most developers, Vaadin looks like this. But the good side is that you can also add more widgets within this architecture. So you have to do both the server side, basically the API part, and the client side, basically the rendering part. And it's actually quite easy, at least for simple components. When you start to do something really complex and big in the client side, even with Google Web Toolkit, it might turn a bit complex. But there is nothing that we can do to help that. One thing that is quite exciting for Vaadin developers is directory. It's kind of channel for distributing all those widgets people have been doing. It has UI components, it has data source implementations, so for example, you don't have to bind those tables back to the file system. You can bind them to Hibernate or Eclipse Link or Lucene or whatever you are wanting them to be, or kind of wanting to integrate them. There are themes, some tooling. As a quick demo of that, it looks like this. You can go to vaadin.com/directory, browse it, select one component that you like here, go to the component, see the description, whether it does what you want to. Most of the components has online demos also, provided by the developers of the components. So you can try the component out in live. If you like it, you can see the source code examples, how those components could be used. Download it. In your Eclipse project, you just drop the component jar file into your project libraries directory, and Eclipse asks, should I recompile the widget set? Basically, should I do full Google Web Toolkit compilation for you? And it's actually just a one-time event. When you add one widget, you have to recompile the client side, but after that, no recompilations are necessary. So we can code some kind of small example. For example, here it's a for loop that adds those rotary knob components on screen. This is the full source code of the application, and you don't get much. You get a bunch of rotary knobs on the screen. But it's as simple as drag and drop to your Eclipse and then start to use it. For other tooling, we are supporting Maven. Vaadin can be found in repo 1 in main Maven repository. We also have a repository where we automatically package all the add-ons and move them in our repository, so you can also include all the add-ons from the directory. I think currently there is 130 add-ons in the directory, and we're actually quite proud of that because we launched the directory just 6 months ago or 5 months ago, so the community has been really active. There is some preliminary integration with NetBeans. We are working on Spring Roo, hope to release a Roo plugin that auto-generates Vaadin user interfaces on top of Roo projects. You can deploy it in most environments. Any kind of Java server will do. We just require basic servlet support, but you can also deploy as a portlet with any portlet standard. You can deploy in Google App Engine. Maybe you could deploy in Magnolia in someday in the future also. And it's quite easy to get started. So first go to the website, download the thing, see the demos yourself. There is a bunch of tutorials, really helpful community. You got the book, so it's kind of, actually it was called Reference Manual for Vaadin. And then I thought it's quite boring, so it, now it sounds a bit religious, and if you want to see some really crazy stuff, go to, I think it's attachment 2, there is a kind of history of Vaadin name. Actually, the author, Marco Grönroos, who wrote the book, he really disliked the idea of selecting name for a technological thing from somewhere else than from mythology or kind of ancient Greek name. So he had an idea that maybe this Vaadin thing could be kind of promoted as mythology. So he wrote a piece of text and was almost adding that to Wikipedia, where he explains that Vaadin is a kind of mythological creature in Finnish Kalevala, where it's a long story. But anyway, kind of claiming that it's ancient name from Finnish mythology and kind of trying to promote that in different websites and get people believing that. But fortunately, he didn't do that. He instead included that in the book. There is also a really nice reference card from DZone. It's kind of Vaadin in 6 pages. So I took a bunch of copies with me. I don't know if all of you got one, but if you didn't get it, you can download it for free from dzone.com. So we have 6 minutes for questions. So the question was, So the question was, are there different versions of JavaScript that Vaadin sends to the browser? Absolutely yes. From the browser side, Vaadin is just the Google Web Toolkit application. So we have coded all the client side in Java, compiled that with Google Web Toolkit compiler, and it has created a bunch of different versions of the JavaScript. Actually, one of the things that might be noted about the JavaScript is that because we are doing all the coding, application coding on the server side, when your application grows from 10,000 lines to 100,000 lines, the size of the client side JavaScript doesn't grow. When you are using Google Web Toolkit, your client side code size grows while you're growing your application. Currently, I think the size is 150K or so that gets sent to the browser. Yeah, other questions? Yeah.
There's a Vaadin Graph plugin. Can you talk about that a little bit?
So the question is that there is a Vaadin Rails plugin, and unfortunately I cannot talk about it because I don't know too much about Rails. It's contributed by the community. I think it generates Vaadin applications that work with Rails. I think there is several people who have been creating and contributing different Rails-related stuff to Vaadin, but I don't know them. So the question is how to compare Icefaces and Vaadin. Icefaces is an Java Server Faces implementation, and that's both the good thing and the bad thing. So it follows standard, but because the standard uses a lot of XML and kind of glues component model on top of page model. And I'm not saying that it's a bad thing, but it just does so. So Icefaces program involves a lot of XML. Basically, you are declaring your user interfaces in XML. You are gluing your backend to that user interface by specifying things in that XML dialect. From a kind of technical point of view, they are quite similar. Both running your code on the server side, both include Ajax-based engine that renders the thing on the screen. Both include quite rich widget set. So it's a matter of days. If you want to use Java Server Faces, Icefaces is one of the best implementations. One differentiating thing is that Vaadin is, in my opinion, much more extendable. You can use Google Web Toolkit to extend and add more components to Vaadin. In Icefaces, I think it's kind of custom JavaScript thing that they are kind of including in the library that gets used to extend the library. But I'm not too familiar with that. Yeah, so the question is how to modify the HTML that gets generated. For example, here, if we view the source code, it's actually this small. So it basically just declares one div that acts as a window where Vaadin starts to render your application in. There are two ways to modify that. One is just cut and paste this and modify it in whatever way you want to. So you could basically cut and paste parts and put into your PHP application and get Vaadin components appear in the middle of your PHP application or JSP or whatever you're using. Another way is that you can extend the mechanism in Vaadin that generates this page. So you can kind of change things that get generated here by overriding things in Vaadin web adapter web application context. But it depends on your application. If you want to show Vaadin as a full screen application, then you can. It's better to kind of extend the things there. And if you want to embed Vaadin in some other context, you might want to kind of cut and paste parts of this. There is also a chapter in book that explains how to do that. So the question is could you affect the generation of components and generation of HTML? You cannot. this is just declaring one div, and Vaadin takes over and starts rendering to that div. If you want to change how it gets rendered, you have to add more widgets to Vaadin. It's not that big deal. You can take any of the existing widgets and override it and start to modify it or create a new widget. Good question. The question is, can you search engine optimize this? No and yes. By default, Google doesn't understand anything out of this. If you want to index your application, then you must create a kind of small parallel version of your application that shows just the stuff that needs to go to the Google Web Index. As an example, you can see that Vaadin directory, it gets indexed, and it's quite doable, and it's not like coding your application twice. It's more like coding a servlet that generates those content parts of your application that you want to get indexed. Okay, thank you.